fatty liver disease, or as people say, a fatty liver. Scientifically, this is called hepatic steatosis. What is it anyway? People come to me and complain that they've been diagnosed with fatty liver disease, and they say, but I don't eat any fatty foods at all. I don't have a large build, I'm not overweight, I'm a slim girl. But at the same time, the diagnosis of fatty liver disease has been made, and it's even confirmed by an ultrasound scan. So what is this fatty liver disease? Is it something I'm eating wrong? She's constantly on a diet? The familiar feeling. But they still diagnose fatty liver. What is it? Let's try to figure this out today. What is fatty liver disease? And what needs to be done to prevent it? Look, friends, our body has an organ called the liver. It performs several functions. The liver, like a furnace, acts as a thermoreactor that heats my whole body. But its main purpose, the liver is a filter that cleans all the blood coming from the digestive system. And in fact, from the digestive system into the blood, a large amount of foreign material, foreign bodies get in there in the intestines, and the liver's job is to clean all of this up. So everything we eat gets digested into components, enters our bloodstream, but the liver still needs to filter and check all of it before letting it go further, up to the head. And that's why the liver is a filter. It filters what comes to us from the digestive system. By the way, it inactivates up to 90% of everything we take in. For example, if we're talking about medications, 90% of them are held back by the liver, just as an example. But another extremely important function of our liver is that the liver is a gland that produces bile. What is bile? Well, bile is an emulsifier. It's not an enzyme. It's an emulsifier. It coats fat. Everything we eat is digested by enzymes in the digestive system, but fat can't be digested that way. Before fat can be digested by lipase from the pancreas, it first gets coated by bile. You know what bile reminds me of? It's like the detergent we use when we wash dishes after eating greasy food. That is, to wash greasy dishes, we need to add a bit of alkali. In our digestive system, bile from our liver acts as that kind of alkali. So hepatocytes, the liver cells, produce bile. Then the bile travels through the system of bile canaliculi out of the liver. The right and left bile ducts merge into the common bile duct, and from there it enters the duodenum. But bile itself is alkaline and caustic, and it can't just flow out freely. That's why along the path of bile flow, there is an organ where this bile can be stored, and it's called the gallbladder. This is the only place where bile can be present without causing any damage. Well, that's just how it's designed. So that's its function. There, bile can be stored, it can be retained, and the gallbladder acts as a reservoir so that bile is released in portions. By the way, this is necessary so that a person can eat in portions, not just constantly eating a spoonful every half hour, but eating in portions. And then bile is stored in the gallbladder. But when food, specifically fatty food, enters the digestive system into the stomach, it irritates certain receptors. Then when this food is fatty, that is, bile is needed to digest fat. When this food is fatty, it enters the duodenum, irritating the receptors and triggering two processes. First, the gallbladder contracts and pushes out a portion of bile, while the sphincter that was closing the exit, the sphincter of Oddi, opens. As a result, a portion of bile enters the duodenum. This is how bile is released, but this process must be accompanied by a person eating fatty foods. And if a person's food doesn't contain fatty components, many people tell me, well, I almost never eat fatty foods. So what happens then? In that case, what happens is that the liver still produces bile, and it is stored in the gallbladder. But because a person has improper, untimely, or insufficiently balanced nutrition, their bile doesn't get used. The bile cools down in the gallbladder, and through the system of bile ducts, the pressure in this biliary system increases. And then this leads to what I call bile stasis, where the bile itself begins to damage the liver. And when the liver is damaged, degeneration of hepatocytes occurs there. This degeneration happens without destroying the typical structure of the liver, which is its functional unit. Degeneration of the liver structure with the formation of regenerative nodules is called liver cirrhosis. The formation of connective tissue in the bile ducts is called liver fibrosis or sclerosis. And fatty hepatosis of the liver is degeneration of the liver at the cellular level without destruction of the liver's functional unit. And because of this, the liver cells destroyed by the pressure of bile that wasn't used up are filled with fatty tissue. That's all there is to it. And a fatty liver is the result of bile stagnation. But it's not because a person eats something wrong, eats fatty foods, or just has an unhealthy diet. A fatty liver is actually the result of an improper diet that lacks fatty foods. Or rather, it's not even the absence of fat, but the improper consumption of it. Let's break it down. There is always one long pause in a person's eating routine. This pause is called night. In general, remember, your diet should not include pauses. The production of enzymes in the digestive system happens sequentially and continuously. So restricting food intake when people do all sorts of silly things like fasting or intermittent fasting is complete nonsense because the enzymes keep being produced. And if they're not used for digesting food, these very enzymes end up destroying the glands that produce them. That's why eating should always be consistent, and you shouldn't take breaks in your diet. It's harmful to the body. But there is still one break in our lives. And that break is at night. At night, we don't eat for about 12 hours. So those 12 hours when we sleep, well, for example, if I have dinner at 7 in the evening and breakfast at 7 in the morning, then I end up with about a 12-hour break between meals. So during all those 12 hours, the liver, even at a basic level, continues to produce bile, stores it in the gallbladder, and by morning, the gallbladder is full for everyone. To help you understand what happens in the gallbladder, imagine your bladder. What is it like in the morning? What is your bladder like in the morning? That's right, it's full to the brim. In the same way, the gallbladder is also full in the morning, except it doesn't hurt and you don't feel it. And what's in the gallbladder isn't urine, but bile. It's an alkali and it's even more caustic. And in the morning, just like with your bladder, you need to empty your gallbladder. And for that, you need to eat fatty food so that the bile is released. Moreover, the gallbladder fills up completely overnight, so to empty it, you need to eat a lot of fatty food. And for liver health, you should have the biggest and fattiest breakfast possible. And when you have a big fatty breakfast, all the bile that accumulated overnight will be used up, your gallbladder will be empty, and it will stay healthy. There won't be any bile stagnation, which causes inflammation and chronic cholecystitis. There won't be any stagnation that leads to the formation of sand and later stones and gallstone disease. And that morning bile won't damage the liver itself, preventing the development of fatty hepatosis. That's why it's essential if you want a healthy liver and to avoid hepatosis, or even if you already have it, you need to change your diet so that you have a big fatty breakfast. At the same time, you need to make sure that your total daily intake doesn't change. In other words, the food stays the same as before. You just need to eat it in the morning. And the second component is to ensure proper movement without interruptions so that the sphincters don't block the flow of bile. What do you need to do? I use infrared heat from Turmanium ceramics for this purpose. Infrared heat has the unique property that heated Turmanium ceramics, which emit heat similar to that of my own body, provide especially deep warming. So if we use a regular rubber hot water bottle instead, most likely there won't be any effect. But infrared heat from Turmanium ceramics does produce results. You need to place it on the right hypochondrium and warm your abdomen for 20 to 30 minutes each time after eating. And if you warm your abdomen, all the bile ducts expand and all the bile flows out. That's why you shouldn't warm up on an empty stomach. What would the bile be digesting then? There's nothing for it to digest, so in order for there to be something to digest, you must warm your abdomen only after eating, not on an empty stomach. And when you do this warming, the liver is cleansed of stagnant bile. And if it has high regenerative capacity, the liver recovers. Friends, the liver does not recover properly in cirrhosis when the structure of the hepatic lobule is disrupted. With cirrhosis, yes. With sclerosis and fibrosis, its recovery is severely limited. They're connective tissue growth and you can't remove it from there. But in the case of hepatosis, when a person experiences fatty degeneration of liver cells, warming the liver is most beneficial for the liver itself, allowing the natural state of hepatocytes within the hepatic lobule to be restored. Therefore, warming the liver and having the right diet that cleanses the liver of morning stagnation, of morning bile, of bile stasis, leads to liver recovery in cases of fatty hepatosis. Fatty hepatosis is not about eating fatty foods, it's about not eating the fats you needed to eat in the morning. And every single person with fatty hepatosis tells me, I don't eat anything at all in the morning. Well, good for you. But what good have you actually done? You're just destroying your liver. Night, your liver was made enzymes, and in the morning, enzymes, nothing processed, you didn't eat in the morning, so the liver gets destroyed. That's how hepatosis starts. That's how gallstones form. Then they'll remove it, and you'll end up with diabetes too. So to prevent fatty hepatosis, we need to change our diet to have a big, hearty, and as early as possible breakfast. Then after that, be sure to warm up your liver for at least 20 to 30 minutes after every meal. And this will help clear the liver of stagnant bile and promote its proper recovery. That was the information for you today about fatty liver hepatosis.